I am Lisa Zengarini.
And as we all know that this year is the Jubilee of 2025, and what we're witnessing is a sede vacante, an interregnum period, a vacancy, and a conclave in expectation of a new pope. But this isn't the first time such an historic occurrence of events has unfolded. The Jubilee year of 1700 also saw the death of the Pope, the Innocent XII, in September of that year. The conclave was held, and Pope Clement XI was elected the successor of St. Peter. And Father Paul Samasumo runs us through in this program some of the highlights of that similar historical moment that took place 325 years ago.
The sede vacante during the 2025 Holy Year evokes the historical parallels with the year 1700. The Jubilee year was also marked by the death of a Pope, Innocent XII, who died before the end of the Holy Year he had proclaimed, leaving the Church without her pastor. Pope Innocent XII suffered frail health in later years due to podagrass, a form of rheumatic illness that prevented him from personally opening the Holy Door at Christmas in 1699. He died 9 months later on September 27, 1700, at the age of 85. His death ushered in a nearly 2 months period of sede vacante before the election of his successor, Pope Clement XI, on November 23. During that interregnum period, the Vatican's numismatic office minted a coin to commemorate the nearly 2 months of vacancy in the chair of Peter. That coin from 1700 is now on display in the medal collection of the Vatican's Apostolic Library. On its reverse, the coin depicts the dove as the Holy Spirit, with the Latin verse from the Gospel of John, Non vos relinquam orphans, meaning, I will not leave you orphans. Professor Eleonora Gianpiccolo, director of the Numismatics Department of the Vatican Library, said the saying refers to the death of Innocent XII, but also conveys a clear message of hope for the conclave that was about to begin. Born Antonio Pignatelli, Pope Innocent XII was known as the father of the poor, and his pastoral approach bore a strong resemblance to that of Pope Francis. He is remembered for his care for the poor and the marginalized. The pontificate initiated projects to help the orphans and the homeless. For example, he founded an institution in the Lateran Palace to house young Roman orphans and to teach them trades. Yet the similarities between the two popes don't end here. Upon his death, Innocent XII donated all his possessions to the poor. The decision finds echoes 3.5 centuries later, with Pope Francis's decision to give his belongings to support prison rehabilitation. After the year 1700, the dove of the Holy Spirit became a typical symbol of the sede vacante, since it expresses divine guidance in the selection of the new pope. Unlike the Jubilee begun by Pope Francis this past Christmas Eve, the ritual opening of the 1700 Holy Year, traditionally performed with the 3 hammer strikes, was not presided by Innocent XII due to his severe illness. Due to his advanced illness, the Cardinals were forced to choose a substitute to open the Holy Door in his stead. The Camerlengo, the Vice-Chancellor, and the Dean of the College of Cardinals met and decided to allow the Vice-Dean, Cardinal de Bouillon, to open the door. When the annual medal of 1700 was issued, the engraver chose not to depict the cardinal who had broken open the wall replacing the Pope, but instead portrayed the Holy Door already open and being crossed by a procession of the faithful. Pope Innocent XII's love for his children, for the Church, is also commemorated by a final, larger medal crafted by Beatrice Amerani, a female member of one of the most important families of engravers at the Papal Mint. On the reverse, a pelican is shown tearing open its chest to feed its young with its blood, an image of Christ's sacrifice and his love for humanity, especially in times when his church on earth lacks her pastor.
And while we're on the subject of the Jubilee year, Father Greg, could you tell us a little bit about the pilgrims? There millions of people are expected to come to Rome, and some already have. So tell us about the
Yes, and some of the pilgrim groups have come to our church, St. Patrick's, from the United States. For instance, Archbishop Perez of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia came with 98 pilgrims and celebrated a couple masses in our church, which was wonderful to have them. And then, of course, the special jubilees are still going on, like the Jubilee of Bands and Entertainers is coming up on the 10th and 11th. And the Eastern churches after that, the confraternities, and then families. And so those are continuing, although the way it's going to be done until there is a pope is going to be, it'll be different. But we are seeing more and more pilgrims in May and June and July even. And there's the whole week of youth, the Jubilee of Youth at the end of July and the beginning of August, which will attract a lot of people.
Yeah, we know the canonization of Blessed Carlo Acutis was supposed to happen a couple of weeks ago.
27th of April.
27th, yeah.
Yeah.
Sunday.
And exactly. And now that it's just been suspended, so there's speculation it could happen later, it will happen, but they've said it will, they will wait for the new pope to decide when and to confirm it. And so we're looking forward to this renewed jubilee in a way where everyone will be curious to come and see the new pope and to be here for the jubilee year and go through the holy doors.
And that's one of the things too is they want information on how to go through the holy door, what to do before, after, during, and now we just took a group to Santa Maria Maggiore, and so that the added thing of going and pay honor to Pope Francis at his tomb, which is a beautiful experience for many people.
Well, for me, it's been interesting to talk to these pilgrims because they said they're very happy that there is a church for English-speaking and for Catholic Americans in Rome. So they enjoy meeting those of us who are been members of the parish for years, and then meeting fellow pilgrims. So it's a wonderful gathering point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What about some of the liturgical events that are planned here in the next few days?
Well, weeks? What would always be on a papal schedule, as it is every bishop in the world, you're going to have the Ascension, of course, has to be celebrated. That is on Thursday, May 29th. Pentecost is on June 6th. And then you've got Corpus Christi on June 22nd. And that's always a very special event in Rome. So the new pope will be looking at a liturgical schedule and a Jubilee schedule, lots of events as Father Greg outlined. Many months of events, but the liturgical would be right now, May and June, for sure.
And one of the things that all of the cardinals, as Dr. Don Prodlos mentioned earlier, is every cardinal has a titular church, and St. Patrick's, Father Greg, is the titular church of one of the cardinals in the conclave right now.
Cardinal Thomas Collins, he's the Metropolitan Archbishop Emeritus of Toronto, Canada, and he came to our church on Sunday, celebrated the 10:30 Mass, and gave a wonderful homily, which Joan can tell you about, and was very well received by the people. And we had a baptism of a child at that Mass, too, which was nice.
No, that was truly, truly wonderful. But the great thing, Cardinal Collins has a wonderful personality. He laced his terrific homily with a good dosage of humor. But what he did was so beautiful. He had 3 readings, as we do every Sunday, 2 readings at Mass, and you have the Gospel. He took each of those readings, expounded on it briefly, and then named a quality associated with that reading, first reading, courage, and said this is a quality that a pope must have. The second reading, the quality was vision. A pope must have vision. And then the gospel, which is the gospel, of course, of Simon Peter being asked by the Lord, "Do you love me?" And Simon Peter reaffirming strongly 3 times, "You know, Lord, I love you." And Jesus says, "Go feed my sheep." And so the point being in the gospel, a pope must have great closeness every moment of his day to Christ. So that was just beautiful. And I think to emphasize really what Greg said, the cardinal made it very clear the cardinals are electing the successor, the vicar of Christ. Yeah.
And so Cardinal Collins was mentioning that he's a successor of Peter, right?
Right. He's not the successor of Pope Francis. He's the successor of St. Peter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things Cardinal Collins said during his homily was that this baptism that was taking place at the Mass was, he said, there are 2 important events that are taking place in the coming days. One is this baptism that's about to happen, and then the other is the election of the Pope. He said this election, in a way, the election, this new member's entry into the family of God, into the Christian family, that's an act of God, he said. And he said this conclave that's happening, this election of the Pope, that's an act of men. We are electing the Pope under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, but it's an election. It's we choose, and then God kind of confirms this choice and gives His grace of the Holy Spirit to the man who will lead the Church.
And as we pass the 11 o'clock hour, I would like to greet once again all those of you who may be joining us. Thanks also to our partners throughout the world, our partner stations. And a reminder that you can follow the Conclave on our Radio Vatican app, the Vatican News web portal, or our YouTube or Facebook Live links. We are at a point now in the morning where if a pope where very likely the cardinals have proceeded to the first morning ballot. If a pope is elected, we would see white smoke, but if a pope is not elected, then we would go immediately to the second vote and wait until after that to get the smoke. Maybe, Joan, you've been a Pope journalist, Vaticanista, for many years, and you've watched more than one conclave. Can you talk a little bit about what happens as the crowds are waiting to look at the smoke and why we have that disjunction between possible smoke and possible not?
Oh, sure. Well, when people, they have an idea. I mean, they know the Cardinals are meeting, it's Thursday morning, the Cardinals are meeting for so many hours. Something is going to come out of that. And so the expectation, just people chit-chatting, but there's an excitement that you feel just walking in the square, just listening to people. But I have to say, the moment the white smoke comes out, the excitement goes into hysteria because you have a person coming out, you don't know who it is, then you find out who it is, then you hear his name, and it's an awesome feeling. The void has been filled. We are no longer sede vacante, without a pope. So many things that can't be done because we were without a pope. So those of us in the church who know this particular aspect of it. But just the faithful, they want to know who their new Holy Father is. And it's an excitement beyond telling. I remember certainly for Pope Benedict, I was working for the Vatican at the time, and we had a very, very strong feeling that he would be elected early, that it would be Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger elected early. And there was great joy as those of us in the press office filed out and went into the square and rejoiced when we heard his name. And then covering the conclave of 2013, I was in the square, but I had to be on television at 8 o'clock, so I'm going back up, and I think it was sometime after 8 that this Jorge Bergoglio comes out onto the balcony, and there was a huge excitement in the crowd. We have a pope, even if we haven't quite heard his name yet. There's this man in white. And then with all the correspondents that were around us on the roof of the Augustinianum, it was like, what's his name? Jorge Bergoglio. What name did he take? Where's he from? So all the questions, and a lot of research had to be done, because when you have someone unexpected, as John Paul II was,
Yeah, he was totally unexpected.
Yes.
He wasn't one among the popable or papabile, as they say.
Exactly.
He was overlooked. The church took a new direction.
But it's a real
line of
exciting
tradition.
feeling.
Yeah, Father Greg, have you seen any? Were you around for any of the recent elections, or?
I was here for the election of Pope Francis, yes, and it was very exciting just being in. I was watching it on TV, but then I went down and was around the area, and it was very exciting because it was something new and unknown, and what does it mean, and where are we going, and the whole difference between the fact that Pope Benedict had resigned, but he was still there, and then this new Pope, and how that would work, throughout the years that followed until the death of Benedict.
That you could not call him Francis the First.
Yeah.
And journalists had to discover very quickly that you could not call him Francis the First, because a pope doesn't become the first until there is a second. And so
I remember I was watching rewatching that event. I was there in the square, but I was rewatching it the other day, and the subtitle underneath on one of the broadcasters was Francis the First. And then later in the broadcast, somebody did a little bit of deeper research, and then they took out the first part. And
curiously enough, the first in centuries was John Paul I. And when he was announced as John Paul I.
Yeah.
Precisely because it hadn't happened in so long. There was a little question of what was most appropriate. And no one really got to delve too deeply into that in the I believe it was 33 or 34 days of the John Paul I papacy. But when Francis was elected and chosen, he became the first pope in centuries, except for John Paul I, to choose an entirely new name. They did do a little bit more study and decision-making, and Francis made the decision, yes, I am Francis. Ego sum Francis. And that, of course, is how he signed his documents. Francis.
And what's on his tomb.
It's interesting to think about what names have never been used. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, not Thomas the
And there's no
Doubter.
Peter the Second or Third.
No, and there's
Only
not
Peter.
And in fact, that was one of the reasons for the custom of changing your name when you became pope to a different name, was the idea that it would not be appropriate to have a Peter II. So the first popes kept their own names. One of the various early ones to change had been named Mercurius, and he felt that the pope should not have the name of a pagan god. So he changed his name, and they continued to take their names for a long time. But then a Peter was elected, and it really did become the idea that we're not going to have a Peter II. And then successively, during a period of reform, a lot of the popes chose names that harkened back to the earliest years of the papacy, the fathers of the church and the early popes, and decided there was a whole string of seconds, Pius II and others, who changed their names, and that became the custom. And now, of course, most popes have most papal names have a long history and long pedigree.
Exactly. And we're at this point, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and it doesn't seem that there has been white smoke, so anything could happen. We're going to stay ready.
We'll keep our eye on the chimney.
And we're going to take a little bit of break for a little bit of music, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
And once again, if you're just joining us, we are broadcasting live from the Vatican. My name is Christopher Wells. We'll be joined here in a few minutes with my co-host, Devin Watkins, our guests, Joan and Father Gregory, and Dr. Joan Lewis, my friend, Dr. Donald Prudlow. As many of you know, many of you have heard Joan Lewis speaking on EWTN. I would like to greet all of our listeners listening in on our partner stations, including EWTN, but also Catholic Faith Network in America, UCTV, Uganda Catholic Television, Mata TV India, Shalom World Television Networks USA, Atmadarshan TV, Radio Katipunan from the Philippines, Catholic TV, and Luminous Radio. And perhaps we could talk about, we saw we're looking at the most famous chimney in the world. And Joan, you were just telling me now about your experience of watching very famous papal chimneys in the conclaves that you've experienced. You've experienced 5, 6. Were you here for the election of Paul VI?
I've been here for the death of 5 popes and 4 or 5 conclaves, but not all covering all of them as
and a papal resignation.
And a papal resignation, exactly. And then I think I said earlier the most unusual when it was John Paul I who died. I was at his inaugural Mass and then left several days later on a special assignment for 3 months in Cairo, Egypt with the New York Times. And that's where I learned about the death of John Paul I and the election of John Paul II. And exciting times to come back here then to a new pope, leave Rome, be away for a couple months, and have the third pope, of course, of 1978, John Paul II.
And Joan Lewis, our special guest. We also have Paulist Father Greg Appercell. Welcome back.
I was just thinking of the fall of 1978 and the year of the 3 popes. That was when I entered the Paulist novitiate. So it's sort of like the beginning of my religious life. Not sort of, it was the beginning of my religious life, and it was such a huge event, a huge series of events in our Catholic Church.
Yeah, and so just to get some of this excitement, we're going to go to a couple of correspondents in the square. First, we're going to go back to Kelsey Gussie, who's still in the square. And Kelsey, how are things going there?
Good. I've actually been talking to a lot more pilgrims who have come from all over, and there's actually one couple who are here on their honeymoon. And they were originally supposed to have a mass, like an audience, with the Pope yesterday, but obviously things changed, and they're super happy to be here to see the potential white smoke. And other people have come also on vacation, one celebrating her daughter's 18th birthday, and so this is an extra special gift that she'll definitely remember forever.
And you've seen the seagulls? Everybody's been noticing the seagulls. I think they're getting their own page on X, and right now most of our images are just of the smoke, the chimney. It doesn't seem to have any particular fauna around, but has anyone been discussing the the natural phenomena that occur around there?
About the seagulls?
Yes.
Well, the seagulls have been a topic of discussion for sure. It's definitely like a signal to people to see whether the white smoke will be happening or not. And I think a lot of people have joked that the seagulls know more than we do, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Oh, thank you, Kelsey.
And in fact, Kelsey, I was very happy to hear your story about the newlyweds here in Rome. It reminds me of a story from the election of Benedict XVI. And I had 2 friends here in Rome, a fellow from New York and his wife from Germany. And when they were married here. They met here in Rome and were married here in Rome. And what many people perhaps don't know is it's possible to get married in St. Peter's Basilica. So my friends asked to be married in St. Peter's Basilica. They were given one of the side chapels. You don't get married at the high altar,
Chapel
obviously.
Of the choir.
The chapel of the choir. Yes, exactly. And so they had a very beautiful ceremony. And they actually asked a bishop that they knew to celebrate the wedding for them. And that bishop, the bride's friend, was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. Mm-hmm. And very shortly after that, he became Pope. So they were in the square doing stand-up interviews with journalists, and they had a picture of themselves in their wedding outfits with the new Pope who had celebrated their wedding. So there's so many of these stories. Father, I'm sure you can tell.
I used to do,
countless
in
tales.
my early days, I did celebrate 25 weddings a year in the chapel of the choir. And I remember when Pope John Paul II died in 2005, we had 4 weddings scheduled during the time that he was laid out for viewing.
Laying in state.
And so they, at the time, I don't know if they would do it today, they said, you can have those weddings still. You can go in the back door. We'll close the curtain and no music. Or they can come back to our Church of Santa Susana. All 4 couples decided to do it that way.
Wow.
And it was, there's a huge long line of people streaming up to pay homage to Pope John Paul II, and we were doing these little weddings in the chapel choir.
In fact, that speaks to the pastoral role of St. Peter's Basilica, where they have not only weddings, they also have baptisms. Have you done baptisms in the Basilica?
No, because they do them on Sundays, and it was hard for me to get away from the parish. I did 2.
But with your church and with St. Patrick's, Rome is certainly a tourist destination, but for Catholics, it's a spiritual destination as well. So you still have to do pastoral care.
Yes, yeah, and I also do what I call spiritual walking tours, where we go to see 3 or 4 or 5 churches on a Tuesday morning, and pilgrims come as well as parishioners.
And of course, that ties in with both the Jubilee this year.
Yes.
We've already talked about you welcoming many pilgrims, but also with the idea of synodality, which has been the perhaps premier initiative of Pope Francis in these past years. Can you talk about the idea of walking together in that context for you in Rome?
And in fact, I remember one time we did have a tour of this several years ago in Santa Maria Maggiore, and they told us to wait in the vestibule because there was a special guest coming through. They turned all the lights on, and we turned, and Pope Francis walked right out of the sacristy to go to the icon to pray before a trip that he was taking to Mexico. And so people said, who are you going to have next week on your tour? Surprise guest.
Wonderful.
But they loved it. It was a great experience.
And we're going to go back to the square right now. We've got our other colleague, Eduardo Giribaldi, who's there in the square. Eduardo?
Hi, Devin. Hi, everybody.
And how are things seeming on your end?
Oh, wow, the atmosphere is really electric here, and it's surprising because it's filled with young people. I've actually interviewed a few of them, and the most striking thing is that many of them came here on purpose just to see the smoke. And that's really surprising because they told me that they had to organize and pack their stuff and come here in just a few days. But they are here. They've been here since 7 a.m. in the morning because they still didn't know about the smoke times. But they are still here, and the weather is pretty warm right now, so it's even a nice view of the square filled with people. They are making connections, so it's really a nice atmosphere. It's really good to be here now, and we're waiting, of course, for the new Pope.
Exactly. Yesterday, when I was in the square, there was some young people who started a conga line, and they were dancing through, and it was getting a little bit raucous in the square as everyone waited for the smoke to come out in the evening. It's easy to forget that this is a working day in Rome, and so I imagine there are more young people than older people.
Definitely. I mean, even old people inside, but the young people make the most out of the year. And that's really encouraging, I would say as well, because, of course, many of them are asking for a brave Pope, a courageous Pope, and they really hope in the spirit of the Jubilee that the next Pope, they don't care so much about the nationality, about the ideology, but what they're asking, I mean, what I'm perceiving is that they're asking for a brave Pope, so a Pope that can face the difficulties and the troubles that the world is undergoing right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eduardo.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And speaking about weddings, and Kelsey was telling us about the honeymooners who are in the square, and she interviewed them, and we're going to hear from them, her conversation with them. It's Sarah and Cameron, who are on their honeymoon here for the Conclave, probably incidentally, from Indiana in the U.S.
We came here for our honeymoon. We got married 5 days ago, and we were supposed to have Mass with the Pope yesterday. So instead, we got to be a part of the conclave and watch it happen.
Congratulations, first of all, that's exciting. But how cool is it that now your honeymoon has turned into potentially seeing the election of a new Pope? How would that be to be here for a new Pope?
Oh, it's been amazing. Last night, we were standing in the square just watching, waiting for the smoke to come. The anticipation's been incredible. Honestly, a dream. I was looking forward to Mass with the Pope, but this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
For sure.
For sure. And all of our family, now that they know we're here, they're like, all right, give us the play-by-play, what's going on here? So it'd be really cool if we get to see the white smoke today.
How would you describe the atmosphere here today, yesterday?
Excitement. Everyone's very joyful, looking forward to what will happen next. No one knows who it's going to be, so whatever it is, it's going to be a mystery, and everyone's excited for it.
Yeah, I would say the same.
Okay. And just lastly, do you guys have any hopes or what you expect from the new Pope for the future of the Church?
I mean, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and just really to be a leader in the Church. Whatever it may be, take a stance and move the Church forward with whatever that may be.
And that was Sarah and Cameron, who were coming in from the U.S. state of Indiana on their honeymoon. Kelsey also spoke to another priest, a student priest here in Rome from the Archdiocese of Bombay in India. His name is Father Prashant Padu. Let's hear from him.
Did you come specifically for the conclave?
Not really. I'm doing my studies over here in Rome, so since it's time of the conclave, I think it's the best time to be here in the square, so probably get to witness the white smoke and also the new Pope.
And why do you think so many people from around the world, whether they're Catholic or not, come to the square during this time of the conclave?
I think the Pope is like a very important figure. The Pope has some standing, whatever the Pope says, the world listens. It's not only the Catholics, but people all around the world, they listen to what the Pope says and they respect the Pope's views. And therefore, you see that there's a lot of respect for the authority of the Pope, and that's why people come here. And I think the Church has had a wonderful tradition of having very good popes who have led the Church and even given guidance to the world, in their pontificate. And therefore, to witness this historic event will be a blessing for all of them also, and that's why they come over here.
And that was Father Prashant Padu, a student priest here in Rome from the Archdiocese of Bombay. And now we've been talking about about the conclave. We've been discussing the intricacies of it and what goes on behind the scenes, what goes on ahead of it. And now let's get into what everybody is downloading and watching. Conclave the movie. So the film that just came out was released a couple of months ago, I'm sure, by pure chance, commercial chance. And so Father Greg is from Los Angeles. He's also a film critic. He's done some programs for us here at Vatican Radio over the years, even as far back as the 90s, helping us out, helping us understand the pop culture, the popular culture surrounding church events. So Father, what's your take on Conclave the movie?
Okay, this is my take. It's, when you know something about whatever the topic is, whether you're a doctor or a nurse or you're a teacher or you're in the government or you know about the monarchy, and they make a film or television show about that, you see all the mistakes and flaws. But usually movies like that aren't really about what they say they're about. Conclave, to me, is a movie about the main character, Cardinal Collins, played by Ray Fiennes, and his crisis of faith. And it's his journey through that faith with the accoutrements of the conclave. The facts of how it's done they're off, but you can't do a documentary in 2 hours and have everything that's in that movie is for dramatic effect, and it relates to the crisis of faith that this man's going through. So you can't use it as a factual basis of what's going on inside that Sistine Chapel right now. It's not a battle between conservatives and liberals, although there's some aspects to it, I'm sure, and it's not about the flaws of each individual cardinal, which I'm sure people are thinking. So they see this movie and they think, okay, now I know what's going on. Well, some of it is true, but there's a lot of errors in it, What are some of the glaring ones that stood out to you? I don't know. I'd have to find out the facts about this, but I'm not sure if Cardinal in Pectore would be allowed to enter like last minute like that, and there's no proof except for one little letter.
Yeah.
And I don't think that and that's the basis for the whole ending and the whole story, but which I think kind of threw the movie off a little bit. On
that point, that's exactly right, because it was made precise that no Cardinal in pectore, who's been named in secret, as anybody who's follows it knows, that there was in the chest, and so he's keeping his cards close to the chest. The Pope can name a cardinal without announcing it to the world. Only he and that cardinal, I imagine, would know. But for it to be valid, he has to announce it publicly by the time of his death. So even if that cardinal were in pectore, if no one knew about it, if it wasn't public record, then he was not a cardinal.
Right.
He doesn't deserve, or wouldn't have the rights to enter.
And
the
there was
conclave.
a lot of not manipulation, but a lot of the previous pope was kind of like the puppeteer, controlling what comes afterwards. And Pope doesn't do that. That's not his job. And there was the secret report of Cardinal Tremblay, the John Lithgow character, and what he was doing. And then he gets Lawrence gets the sister Isabella Rossellini to Xerox it 108 times or whatever it is. I mean, it's all dramatic conflict, intrigue, and it gives the impression. But I'm telling you, that movie's made a lot of money in the last month. Just like I remember back in 79 or 80 when they made the movie The China Syndrome. 2 weeks later, 3 Mile Island happened, and again the popularity went way up. I think it's a well-made movie, but you can't take it for fact.
Yeah, but it kind of gives us a feel like we know everyone's become an expert in Conclave. And an expert on the smells and bells maybe behind it, and the show behind the proceedings that take on a grandeur that only the Vatican can do.
What was fascinating yesterday, just to sit there and watch the whole movement from the Pauline Chapel to the Sistine Chapel and the Litany of Saints, and then sitting there and then doing the whatever the
they
prayer.
Swore their oath.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like it was mesmerizing because you saw this is real, and that was already 2 hours and nothing happened, in that sense.
But I think for in pectore, as I recall, I think it was 1991, Pope John Paul said there was a cardinal in pectore, whom he later revealed to be Cardinal Ignatius Gongpin-Mei. And the reason that a cardinal might not be named, a man might not be named, his life could be in danger. That usually was the rare times it happened. That was the case. He could be in danger if he was named, So Pope John Paul did name him, but
that was the whole story in this thing. It was the Archbishop of Kabul in Afghanistan. Now, I don't know if his life would be in danger based on I don't know the facts of living in that city, but that was the reason. But it was not announced. You're right.
I did not see the movie, but the one thing I do know about it is that on all the airplanes flying from the United States to Rome, it is one of the most selected movies that people view.
The fifth person that's told me that.
Yeah, exactly. So the much viewed in midair movie, Conclave.
Yeah, thank y'all for that. Excellent. So it's kind of like the movie, the Netflix series, The Crown.
Yes,
everyone thinks they know about The Crown, but we really have no idea, really, do we?
Yeah.
I mean, well, none of us are.
But it's some based on some fact, but it's an imagination dialogue that's in the head of the writer, and I mean that's 60 episodes right there.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's not the first of the. It's not the first movie to come out with and talk about the conclave. I mean, the conclave has been in popular culture for as long as conclaves have been happening. There have been different expressions of it. There was the movie. It's probably sacrilegious to even mention it, but Borgia, and that had a whole. It was a long series, and they had pretty in-depth, extended episodes on the conclaves that led to the election of Pope Alexander VI and Julius II, and obviously interpretations and completely unhistorical, but it gives us a sense and kind of reveals for us the interest that the world has in what's happening here in the Vatican as we come back to the present and to reality. Instead of Hollywood's reality, what's going on is of very much interest to the entire world. it's not just Catholics in the square. There are people from all over, and from all different faiths, and that was one hallmark of Pope Francis's papacy, was this welcoming. And if you even look at St. Peter's Square, the two colonnades, they represent the Church's embrace of the entire world. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, Joan.
Well, just thinking of welcoming everybody, referring to numbers, there's 1.4 billion Catholics. So, and then other Christians who are not Catholic. But I remember distinctly with Pope John Paul, what was so fascinating about his very long history was his outreach, of course, as Pope Francis did in his briefer papacy, his outreach to so many people. And you found out that people of all faiths, people of no faith, were fascinated by this man because he took positions that one could understand, positions of morality that you might not have be part of your writings and teachings in the church, but he could reach out to people on a people level. You don't have to know canon law or the Catechism of the Church to understand what John Paul taught. So I thought his reaching out in that respect, and I've always loved the image of the two colonnades embracing all of the humanity that comes inside. So you'd walk inside, and then you're going to walk towards a door of this beautiful church, this basilica of St. Peter's.
And the colonnade, Michelangelo designed the St. Peter's Square and the facade and everything. He didn't build it in the end, but he designed it. And even as soon ago as 1930s, I believe, 1920s, the squares leading up to the streets that were led up to St. Peter's Basilica, and this was how Michelangelo designed his layout of that area of the city, was just like a maze. There wasn't a straight vision. Yeah. And so the Borgo was, there were streets, but there were buildings right in front of St. Peter's Square. So the whole point was that people they'd be walking through, and they'd kind of zigzag through a maze, and all of a sudden you come up and you open up onto St. Peter's Square, and the magnificence of it, and how large and welcoming it is to, and so that was changed obviously during Mussolini's time.
But there were times when buses and cars parked there were even
and not too long ago.
No, not too long ago. Certainly in my many years here, and there was a brief period when, as you're looking at the basilica, would be in the front part of the left-hand colonnade, when there was a brief market. People selling their fresh produce. So the square has served many people.
Yes, it has. And going back to the College of Cardinals, so the actual conclave, the reality of what's going on, let's move now and talk a little bit about the makeup of the College of Cardinals. So the Cardinals there's 133 electors, but the whole college is 252. And 52, thank you, Joan. And the makeup has changed greatly during Pope Francis's papacy.
Yes, in fact, as a lot of people have noted, this is the largest conclave number of cardinals. We've had more cardinals eligible to enter the conclave, but this is the first that's been more than the 120 limit that was set by Paul VI. And one of the pieces of business that the cardinals had to work out when they were preparing for this conclave was how that fit within the law. And they determined that Pope Francis, by creating more cardinals, had tacitly dispensed from the 120 limit so that all 135 cardinals who are eligible could enter the conclave and vote. In fact, we have 133 cardinal electors in the Sistine Chapel, even as we speak. One thing that struck me as kind of curious, Father, your titular cardinal is Cardinal Collins from Toronto. Now is one of the very few times when we have two archbishops of Toronto in the conclave, the emeritus Cardinal Collins as well as the new, very young Cardinal Frank Leo. But overall, we have 135 cardinal electors, 133 actually in the conclave, from 71 different countries. More than 3/4 of them, 108, were appointed by Pope Francis. About 22 were created by Benedict XVI, and there are still 5 cardinals who were created by John Paul II. So it created more than almost 20 years ago. And so a wide variety. Certainly since the mid-20th century, there's been a very strong effort on the part of the popes to increase the representation, ensuring that there are cardinals from around the world, from traditionally Catholic countries, from Catholics with very small Catholic populations, from large traditional elector countries like Italy and France to places that have never had a cardinal before. I think there's something like 16. One of the very curious numbers, we can talk a little bit more about that, is the number of Eastern Cardinals. I believe there are 4 or 5 Eastern Cardinals.
5 of them, exactly.
5 Eastern Cardinals. And I know, Don, you could perhaps talk about, there was a length of time, although most cardinals now had come from Europe for a very, very long time, and our Latin cardinals, there was a run of Greek and Syriac cardinals in the early Middle Ages.
There were Greek cardinals that were, as a result of the Church's attempt to reconnect with Constantinople after the schism. But we tend to forget how diverse the early papacy was as well. There's a period in the 6th and 7th century where we have a number of Greek, Syriac, and even North African popes. Popes like Gelasius were Latin North African. But today we have Eastern Rite cardinals too, and this is a result of the reaffiliation of many churches with their own rites under papal leadership. There are 23 sui juris churches besides the Latin Church. And there are 5 cardinal electors today that are in the conclave from representing the Eastern rites. There's patriarch, one patriarch, Louis Sacco of the Chaldean Church in Baghdad, Basileus Clemis, who is Syro-Malankara from India, Bernhan Jesus Surafiel, who is from the Ethiopian Church, Mykola Bishok, who is a Ukrainian, very young Ukrainian, is 44, I believe, one of the younger cardinals, and George Kuvakad from the Syro-Malabar Church.
And if you were watching the entrance into the conclave, one of the things you note in that very impressive and moving ceremony, you see all the cardinals walking in. Almost all of them are in the familiar red cassocks of the Latin Church. But the 5 Eastern Cardinals stood out for, they all designed their own cardinalatial robes that reflected the traditions of their churches.
Absolutely. It's interesting to see how they work the red, the scarlet into their outfits, into their traditional outfits of their rite, and their traditional choir. And it's clearly the important, but it's also an oddity because these 5 cardinals are electing the head of the Latin Rite as well. It's an interesting extension to see how universal the Church is. That you have these Eastern cardinals participating in the election of the Patriarch of the West, and that's something that's different to consider.
And they also stand out for their headdress.
Yeah,
because it's not the typical red zucchetto. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that was also a question when they are named cardinals. They have to ask, what is the tradition of our church and how can we incorporate what's a Latin tradition, the cardinalate, into that vestment. I think there was an Eastern Rite cardinal in the 1500s, is that right? During one of the periodic attempts at reunion between the East and West. Bessarion.
Yes, Cardinal Bessarion, yes.
Remind me, where is he from?
He was from Constantinople. He was from the clergy of Constantinople, from the party that was supportive of both the Renaissance and a renewed dialogue with the Latins. And he became very important for the transmission of Eastern Greek culture and literature to the West, and was a visible sign of unity at that very difficult time.
And one of the first Eastern cardinals in a long time, and so had a very significant role to play. You mentioned, too, Ukrainian-born Mykola Bishok is aged 45. I believe he is, in fact, the youngest cardinal in the college. The oldest taking part is Spaniard Carlos Osora Sierra, who's aged 79. It's interesting, too. There are a couple of cardinals who have just turned 80 very recently, and had the conclave come a little bit earlier, they would have been allowed to enter. In fact, I remember when Benedict made his resignation, the timing of when the resignation went into effect, there was a consideration for the cardinals who were right on the edge there, and they did get everybody in. And yet, because of the circumstances of the time for that election, the number was still under the 120 limit.
There was one of the Syro Malabar, one of the Eastern cardinals, just missed it by a week, I believe, and others like Cardinal Sarah, I think, would have expired in 2 weeks. As long as they're under 80 on the date the conclave starts, they're entitled to enter the conclave. I
think it's the day that the Pope dies. In fact, there's actually some question about that. I remember we had this discussion amongst ourselves in the broadcast booth, and UDG is very specific, and that too is to ensure, because after the Pope dies, there is the cardinals decide when the conclave opens, and that has historically been a question because of traditional long travel times, and in previous eras where there was a lot of politicking amongst the cardinalate, that could have been an option to exclude someone. So they did change it so that it was from the moment the Pope died, and then it is very much in God's hands who is going to participate in the election. Speaking of age, a few more facts about the cardinals taking part in the conclave. 6 cardinals were actually born in the 70s. Including Cardinal Baldassare Reina, the vicar of the Diocese of Rome, Canadian Cardinal Frank Leo, whom we mentioned, Lithuanian Cardinal Rolandis Makrikas, the coadjutor archpriest of the Basilica of St. Mary Major. He was involved very closely.
We have smoke.
And we do have smoke. Thank you, Don. Well done. It does look like the black smoke is coming out. And then it is very much in God's age. A few more facts about the cardinals taking part in the conclave. 6 cardinals were actually born in the 70s, including Cardinal Baldassare Reina, the vicar of the Diocese of Rome, Canadian Cardinal Frank Leo, whom we mentioned, Lithuanian Cardinal Rolandis Makrikas, the coadjutor archpriest of the Basilica of St. Mary Major. He was involved very closely,
we have smoke.
And we do have smoke. Thank you, Don. Well done. It does look like the black smoke is coming out, signaling the conclusion of the second vote, and I think a little earlier than we were expecting.
Exactly. We weren't expecting this until about 12, at least, to 12:30. I believe we have Kelsey in the square. No, sorry about that. We do not. We're going to try to get her on the line here shortly to get this reactions. But yes, you can see, now we see images of the crowd. The black smoke has come out of the chimney above the Sistine Chapel. Everyone's got their phones out, taking videos of it. And we're going to connect now here shortly. Okay.
And in fact, that's what you see if you're watching on the television screen. I think all of us remember, at least all of us in studio remember, various elections and conclaves. And as soon as smoke starts coming out, the first question on everybody's lips, is it white or is it black? Happily, this time the black smoke has been very clear and is now as well. And when there is that moment, the crowd just goes silent as everybody's looking up and determining for certain what color is the smoke.
And on the modern means of communication yesterday in the square in the evening, whenever the smoke came out, it was dark. It was the sun had already gone down, and you could see the screens, and you can see on the square that it's a close up there. But those as soon as the smoke started coming out, those TVs turned off, and so that everyone would look up to the actual chimney and to focus on what's real and not just what's in front of our in front of our screens. And then it came back on, and you could see that the smoke was black. And now we're going to go live to Kelsey, who's in the square. Kelsey, what are you getting the sense of?
Wow, it's actually pretty exciting right now because you could hear the surprise from people. I know a lot of people were thinking, well, it hasn't come out yet. There's been no smoke. We're not going to see anything for now. And all around me, you could hear cheers, but also gasps and a couple of people saying, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. It's the first time I've ever seen this. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people that are actually exiting the square now, probably going to get some lunch to get prepared for the next smoke watch. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think the first question, as Chris said, is it black or white? And the second question is, what am I having for lunch? Are my dinner reservations still valid?
Can I get into the restaurant with 20,000 people trying to get their pizzas and their pastas? I wonder if,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, you can see on the screen now that we've got the images, the square is not extremely full. There's heavy security to get in. You got to go through metal detectors. But the first part of the Via della Conciliazione is very full. That's a very packed area. And you can see people moving off, right, Kelsey?
Yeah, actually, it's you're right that in front of the piazza, Via Conciliazione is packed with a lot of people, a lot of reporters, but a lot of people. And actually in the square, right in front of the steps leading up to the basilica, that's pretty full, but around the obelisk, it's pretty empty. And, of course, as you mentioned, Devin, a lot of people are exiting now, going to get some water and food and recharge.
Yeah, because we're going to be back again this afternoon. That means the next possible smoke would be around 5:30. This is just a guess, more or less, of the indications that we've received. At that point, it would come out only if the first ballot elected a new pope. And so we would see white smoke only come out around 5:30 or 6 or so. Later this evening, for sure there will be a black or a white smoke at around between 7:30. It all depends on when the Cardinals get started. And from there, we will continue on, and we hope the Cardinals are moving along in their voting process and guiding us toward the future of the church.
And again, very interesting phenomenon I think we saw last night. The square starts out almost not quite empty. There's always lots of people there, but it seems kind of sparse. And then people start filtering in. It fills up. But the moment, I think we all remember, the moment the white smoke comes out, everybody in Rome drops what they're doing. I remember John Paul II's, the conclave after John Paul II, and when Benedict was elected, people were actually leaving their cars by the side of the street and running to St. Peter's Square. We saw two of Pope Francis, which was later in the evening, and although it was not so dense when the white smoke came out, by the time he appeared on the balcony, all of St. Peter's Square, all the way up Via della Conciliazione, packed shoulder to shoulder with people. The whole world shows up.
Where we are right now, a sea of people coming, from near the Casa Sant'Angelo, and just pouring into the Piazza Pia area. And then, as you said, down Conciliazione, there's no way you would have tried to go against the crowd. You would have been trampled, I think. But it was an astonishing thing.
And since this brings us to, we've seen the black smoke, we do not have a pope yet. Voting will continue this afternoon. And with that, we're going to wrap up this broadcast. We thank you, Kelsey, for helping us out in the square, Eduardo, Father Greg Uppersell, Joan Lewis, Dr. Don Prudlow. We really appreciate all of your help and walking us through the intricacies of this historic moment here in Vatican City State. And so our broadcast will pick up again this afternoon at around 5 or 5:30, depending on the indications. And many thanks go to our in-studio sound engineers and our producers. And we thank you for joining us as we await the Cardinals' decision about who will lead the Catholic Church as the next Pope. I'm Devin Watkins.
I'm Christopher Wells. Thank you all for joining us. Also, be sure to follow throughout the day our website, as well as our social media accounts, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, where you can find out lots more information about the conclave, about the process of electing a pope, and join us again this afternoon for the next Chimney Watch for the conclave of 2025.
Laudetur Jesus Christus. Praised be Jesus Christ.